Good evening. This is Inside News. It's Tuesday, October 28th, 2025. I'm Serena. Tonight, we navigate a world confronting nature's fury and humanity's fractures, from a monster hurricane rewriting the Caribbean to political upheavals spanning 3 continents. We examine not only what's making headlines, but the critical stories unfolding beneath them. Let's get started. The Caribbean is facing an environmental catastrophe of historic proportions. Hurricane Melissa, a Category 5 behemoth, has unleashed devastation across Jamaica, with wind gusts reaching 160 miles per hour and coastal surges towering 30 feet. 3 lives have been lost to flash flooding, while thousands flee their homes as this slow-moving storm extends its destruction over days rather than hours. What makes Melissa particularly alarming is its fuel source. Ocean temperatures running 1.5 degrees Celsius above historical averages. Jamaican officials warn of a total reshaping of the island's landscape, with humanitarian crises looming for Cuba, Haiti, and the Bahamas as the storm tracks westward. The United Nations has mobilized emergency aid requests, while Caribbean leaders intensify demands for climate financing from industrialized nations whose emissions have driven these temperature increases. The economic ripple effects extend globally. Vital shipping lanes face disruption, threatening fruit exports and tourism industries that sustain millions of livelihoods across the region. The focus now shifts to Tennessee, where tragedy struck this morning in Hickman County. A catastrophic explosion at a chemical manufacturing facility has claimed 16 lives, with dozens more injured. The plant, which supplies the automotive industry, experienced what preliminary reports indicate was a main storage tank failure, releasing a toxic cloud visible across miles of countryside. Emergency responders continue excavating the rubble, while nearby communities evacuate amid fears of groundwater contamination. Tennessee's governor has declared a state of emergency, triggering a federal Environmental Protection Agency investigation. This disaster revives urgent debates about industrial safety standards and enforcement gaps. The economic consequences extend beyond Tennessee. Automotive supply chains from Detroit to international markets face disruption. Labor organizations are demanding immediate regulatory reforms and enhanced worker protections. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, authorities are responding to a controversial expansion of American counter-narcotics operations. 2 U.S. airstrikes last night destroyed suspected trafficking vessels, killing 5 individuals, marking the first such Pacific operations since September. These actions bring the campaign's death toll to 37. The Pentagon characterizes these strikes as necessary measures against Venezuelan and Colombian cartel networks. However, the United Nations and human rights organizations have issued sharp condemnations, labeling them extrajudicial killings executed without judicial oversight or verified evidence. Venezuela's government denounces what it calls imperialist piracy, escalating already volatile diplomatic tensions. Security analysts warn this approach risks destabilizing critical maritime routes, while potentially pushing trafficking operations overland, creating new security challenges for both American and European interests. Fishing communities from Trinidad to Ecuador report pervasive surveillance and mounting fear, disrupting legitimate maritime commerce. Crossing to Latin America for a closer look at the current situation developing in Colombia. The United States Treasury Department has imposed sanctions on Colombian President Gustavo Petro, his wife and son, an unprecedented action against a sitting democratic leader. The sanctions, announced late last night, allege involvement in international drug trafficking networks and freeze all U.S.-based assets. Bogotá's response has been swift and fierce, condemning what officials characterize as imperial interference in sovereign affairs. The economic implications are severe. American investment flows are already contracting, threatening to trigger broader economic instability. Regional analysts warn this action could destabilize Latin America's political landscape, strengthening anti-American coalitions and potentially driving nations toward alternative partnerships with China and Russia. European Union officials are monitoring the situation closely, concerned about cascading effects across the hemisphere. Back to Mexico, where new data is emerging on catastrophic flooding. Torrential rains linked to El Niño patterns have killed 28 people across central and southeastern states. Floods and landslides have buried villages, with rescue teams working through thick mud to reach survivors. Thousands remain displaced. This tragedy compounds what has already become a record wet season, intensified by decades of deforestation that has eliminated natural water absorption capacity. While the government has activated emergency protocols, critics highlight chronic underinvestment in prevention infrastructure and watershed management. The agricultural devastation extends to Mayan farming communities, raising serious concerns about regional food security and underscoring Latin America's intensifying vulnerability to climate extremes. In Africa, attention turns to multiple flashpoints threatening regional stability. Central Africa is experiencing dangerous political turbulence following yesterday's presidential election. Paul Biya, at 92 years old, the world's oldest head of state, has declared a landslide victory in polling widely denounced as fraudulent. The announcement has ignited fierce protests in Yaoundé, where opposition supporters have erected burning barricades across major thoroughfares. At least 10 deaths have been confirmed as security forces employ violent crackdown tactics reminiscent of previous uprisings. The African Union has issued calls for restraint, but the complete absence of international election observers deepens skepticism about result legitimacy. This crisis threatens to inflame ethnic fault lines and could destabilize the broader Sahel region, already struggling with security challenges. Western powers traditionally aligned with Biya, notably the United States and France, appear hesitant about continued support, facing pressure to prioritize democratic principles over strategic relationships. Developments continue in Sudan, where a critical military defeat may reshape the nation's future. The Rapid Support Forces captured the Sudanese army's final stronghold in El Fasher, Darfur, yesterday, trapping hundreds of thousands of civilians in what United Nations officials describe as an apocalyptic humanitarian emergency. This drone-supported offensive represents a decisive moment in civil warfare that has killed tens of thousands since 2023. Blockades are creating conditions for imminent famine across the region. Sudan's government accuses the United Arab Emirates of providing material support to the RSF, while allied Darfur rebel groups retreat. Military analysts suggest this battle could fundamentally redraw regional boundaries and embolden neighboring jihadist organizations. The refugee crisis intensifies as displaced populations flood into Chad, overwhelming already strained humanitarian infrastructure. The implications extend beyond Africa, threatening Nile River water security, petroleum resources, and potentially accelerating migration flows toward Europe. The situation in Mali has taken an alarming turn. The military junta ordered the immediate closure of all schools and universities this morning, a decision affecting 7 million students, in response to fuel blockades imposed by al-Qaeda-linked insurgent groups. This drastic measure, formalized last night, aims to counter intensifying Sahel offensive operations, but carries devastating long-term consequences for a nation already struggling with chronic illiteracy. Recent combat has killed dozens and effectively isolated the capital Bamako. France and the United States have criticized the shutdown as a catastrophic setback for democratic development and human capital. Education specialists warn that children removed from school systems become prime targets for recruitment by armed groups, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of violence and instability. This crisis exemplifies the profound post-colonial security dilemmas confronting the Sahel region. Crossing to the Middle East, where tensions show no sign of easing, Israeli military forces conducted a combined ground and air operation near Jenin in the occupied West Bank last night, resulting in 3 Palestinian deaths and 10 arrests. The raid in Kafr Qud village represents part of an intensified campaign that has produced over 700 Palestinian fatalities since October 2023. Palestinian authorities condemn what they characterize as brutal occupation tactics, while Israeli officials defend the operations as targeted counter-terrorism measures against Hamas infrastructure. The United Nations has expressed grave concern about escalating violence and the potential for broader regional conflagration. These operations complicate already fragile Gaza ceasefire negotiations. Yesterday alone saw 61 Palestinian deaths in that territory. Geopolitically, the raids strain Israel's relationships with Jordan and Egypt, both critical regional partners. By day's end, protests had erupted across Palestinian territories, highlighting the enduring and seemingly intractable nature of this conflict. Our opening brief takes us now to Asia Pacific, where extreme weather dominates. Cyclone Mantha made landfall near Kakinada on India's eastern coastline tonight, delivering 60-mile-per-hour winds that have triggered catastrophic flooding across 16 districts in Andhra Pradesh. The severe storm system has ripped roofs from structures and severed electrical service to millions of residents. 4 fatalities have been confirmed in landslide incidents. Following a red alert issued by the Indian Meteorological Department last night, government authorities deployed military units for emergency rescue operations. Educational institutions throughout affected areas remain closed indefinitely. Climate scientists directly link this storm's intensity to rising Arabian Sea temperatures, emphasizing the increasing vulnerability of India's densely populated coastal regions. Agricultural losses are substantial. Rice crop destruction threatens regional food security. While United Nations agencies have committed assistance, infrastructure experts criticize persistent delays in developing adequate cyclone-resistant building standards and early warning systems. This event amplifies the climate emergency confronting South Asia, where such disasters are accelerating in both frequency and severity. On a brighter note from the subcontinent, Indian cricket star Smriti Mandhana has ascended to the #1 position in women's one-day international batting rankings. The opener's achievement comes during a remarkable home World Cup campaign capturing national attention. India faces a crucial semi-final against Australia on Thursday, with squad adjustments necessary following Pratika Rawal's injury. Shafali Verma assumes her position. Mandhana's success resonates beyond sport, inspiring millions of young women across India and elevating women's cricket visibility despite persistent infrastructure limitations. The achievement represents meaningful progress towards sports equity on the international stage. As we conclude tonight's broadcast, we're reminded that genuine understanding of our interconnected world demands looking beyond the headlines that dominate, toward the patterns, the contexts, and the stories that unfold gradually, away from breaking news cycles and camera lights. From Hurricane Melissa's unprecedented Caribbean destruction to democracy's quiet erosion in Cameroon. From technological disruption reshaping American employment landscapes to an educational crisis creating Mali's lost generation. These narratives are interwoven threads in our global community's fabric. Here at Inside News, our commitment remains unwavering. Comprehensive coverage that examines not merely what's happening, but what it signifies, especially for those whose voices too often go unheard, whose struggles receive inadequate attention, whose futures depend on awareness translating into meaningful action. Thank you for joining us tonight. Stay informed, stay engaged, and remember that in our complex world, every story carries weight, every voice deserves hearing, and every truth matters. Good journey to all. I'm Serena. This has been Inside News.